And I'm going to share my screen with you in just one moment. I hope you're all having a wonderful Tuesday afternoon. It's so good to see some of you, see your smiling faces. This is can you believe it's already April? We have already made it to April. Woohoo! We should be celebrating. All right, let me share my screen with you so that we can go ahead and get started with today's meeting. And pull my chat box up so that I can see who's with us today. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Can you type in yes if you can see the PowerPoint with a graduation hat?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Thanks for being here with us today, too. So we don't have a lot to discuss today, but what we do have to discuss is very important. So let's take a look at, uh-oh, it's not letting me advance. There we go. Let's take a look at what's on our agenda for today. We're going to talk about Epicenter due dates. We have a few things that are still to come this year. It's not quite over yet. We're going to talk about Title I and Title II allocations and applications. We received Title I and Title II allocations preliminary this week. Woohoo! So it's time to get started on those. I'll also give you a couple of financial updates and reminders, tell you what I know about ESSER so far. I've been getting lots of questions about that. We're also going to talk about Title I eligibility. There is a new methodology we're going to talk about, so that impacts all of our schools. So don't leave me when we get there, because that impacts all of you. And then for our Title I schools, I just wanted to share some things about an upcoming due date that you have for your end of year evaluations, your impact statement. So we'll talk through that as well. So let's go ahead and jump into some Epicenter due dates that are coming up. As you know, there were a couple of changes regarding your planning meeting documentation for Title I and Title II. We made those changes because we know some of you were still working on your planning meetings and you were wanting to coordinate some of those meetings to coincide together to be federal programs planning meetings. So I moved the due date for your Title I planning meeting documentation and your Title II, we'll get to Title II in just a minute, so that you can submit on the same date that your application is due. So May 14th, go ahead and star that for any of our Title I schools that are currently Title I. I'm going to talk a little more about eligibility in a little bit, but if you are currently a Title I school, it's always best practice to kind of assume that you might be next year so that you already have your application ready, you have your needs assessment done. We'll talk through those templates in a few minutes, but I wanted to make sure you have those due dates marked on your calendars. They should also show up in your queue for Epicenter. July 1st is the date for your impact statements. I also have a template very similar to the template that you used for your mid-year impact statements. I have a template for that you can access at the end of the or later on in the slide, so we'll take a look at what that looks like. And we also moved the date for your equipment and inventory control logs to August 15th. We felt like that was a better date because it's going to give you an opportunity to go ahead and reconcile your equipment and inventory control logs so that you're ensuring that you have everything you need. I know you may have a lot of equipment such as Chromebooks or iPads that you may have checked out to students, and you'll be collecting that at the end of the year. So we wanted to give you plenty of time to be able to reconcile that documentation, and then you can submit it in August with any notes that you may have. All right, so Title II, again, we did move those due dates to June 15th. The Title I application and the Title II application are due 1 month apart from each other to the State Department. So for you, it's 1 month apart. So again, you're going to want to submit that Title II application with the needs assessment into Epicenter by June 15th. And then also your Title II planning meeting documentation that includes all of those requirements that we talked about during last month's planning meeting discussion. So make sure you have your announcement that you're sending to invite parents or stakeholders to the meeting. Make sure you include your sign-in sheet. If it's something that you do virtually, you can provide the sign-in sheet just like I did here with asking you to type in your name, your school, and what your title is. You can do the same thing with your planning meetings and submit that as a sign-in sheet if it's virtual. You also want to include any documents. If you have a PowerPoint, you want copies of the PowerPoint. If you're sending home any of the things for Title I, such as your parent compact or your homeschool compact or your parent family engagement policy to get feedback if you're a Title I school, make sure you have that documentation in there as well. Oh, I almost forgot the agenda. Make sure you include a copy of the agenda. And then the most important thing that people usually forget would be your minute meetings. I mean, your meeting minutes. Tongue twisted there for a minute. Don't forget that. So make sure someone's taking minutes and you supply a summary of those with your Title I documentation. And then also if you're planning for Title II, your Title II documentation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the timeline for Title I and Title II. Can't believe that it's already time for planning for FY22. So we did receive Title I and Title II preliminary allocations this week, yesterday, as a matter of fact. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Title I allocations in just a moment because there is a potential for us to move to a different methodology. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But the due dates as of right this minute are as follows. Your Title I preliminary application, which would be for our current Title I schools. Again, keep in mind that we do have to determine eligibility every year. So if you are currently a Title I school, we want you to go ahead and assume that you might be a Title I school next year. Go ahead and work towards your work on your needs assessment and your planning meetings and work on your application so that once we determine eligibility, you have an application ready to turn in. I don't want you to have to scramble at the last minute. The preliminary Title I application is due to the State Department on July 1st. So as you can see, that gives us about a month and a half for you to work on after you've submitted your application, for you and I to work back and forth on any changes that might be needed. If we do not have allocations ready by May 14th, which it's looking like we may not have those ready for you, then I will extend that due date and give you a different date that you can submit your application. So please do not submit any applications in Epicenter until you actually have those preliminary allocations, so that the budget that we're looking at is based on preliminary allocations. The Title II applications are due June 15th as of right now. I don't anticipate that we'll have a change for Title II applications. The process to determine allocations is a little less cumbersome, I guess you could say. It's a little simpler, and we already have the data that we need for that. So Title II applications are due to the State Department July 31st. So that gives us, again, about a month and a half to ensure that we have your application correct, and gives me time to process those applications, upload them to GEMS, and wait for that approval. So preliminary Title I may change based on how soon we can get those allocations out to you, the preliminary allocations, but more than likely Title II will stay the same. Okay, so just to give you an idea, the Title I and II application process has not changed from the past couple of years. You're still going to submit a Title I needs assessment. You're also going to submit a Title II needs assessment. Once I send out this PowerPoint, you will have links to the templates. They're also on our website under federal programs. You can find them listed under either Title I or Title II. Title I also has a planning guide link for you to access. This is not the application. The Title I planning guide simply gives you a little more detail and gives you an opportunity to see examples of well-written Title I plan or Title I activities. And we've talked about this a lot already, so I'm not going to go into detail, but this is a planning guide that if you're new to our schools or new to our district, You may not be familiar with the Title I Planning Guide, but this is something that was given out last year. So it has all of the budget codes, the high-level budget codes and what they mean. It also has the reform strategies and all of the other indicators that you have to list in one of the columns. If you are a new school and this will be the first time you've ever completed a Title I application, then I will work one-on-one with you to help you understand each of those boxes. I also have a link to the Title I allowable and non-allowable costs. These are just examples. I know our schools are famous for coming up with out-of-the-box activities, and I encourage you to think out of the box, or out of the universe, as I like to say. So please don't limit yourself to the examples that are provided in these references. It simply gives you a guide so that you'll definitely know what's not allowable, and then some ideas for ways that you can use the funds. There's also a link to the Title I reform strategies. And then again, for Title II, you have the needs assessment template and you have the allowable uses of funds, which we've talked a lot about this year already. If you choose to do a combined Title I and Title II needs assessment together, we've talked a lot this year about needs assessments. Last month, we focused a lot on what that process looks like, and based on some feedback from all of you, we are hoping to be able to use some of our Title I funding to be able to offer additional professional development. Many of you said, are we going to have some more training on this? So as a result of your feedback, we have been looking into some opportunities. So be on the lookout for some additional training. I don't know that that's going to come before your needs assessment is due this year, unfortunately, but we are working toward that. We're using these templates have not changed, but again, if you decide to combine them together, what I want you to focus on is making sure you have components that are needed for each assessment, each needs assessment. So for example, your Title I needs assessment is going to focus on your academic achievement, parent and family engagement needs. It will also focus on your subgroup data for your students. So that's one piece of information that is sometimes missing from a needs assessment. So be sure not to leave out your subgroup data for your students. And as I talked about last month, making sure that you not just provide the data, but you're also analyzing the data. The State Department likes to know that in your planning process, you know what that data means, and you know how that data translates into the needs of your students or teachers or whatever the case may be. So be sure that you include very detailed descriptions and analysis of what those needs are based on your data. The Title II needs assessment is going to focus more heavily on educator quality. So like I said, if you decide to combine these together, that's fine, but make sure you include the relative information that's needed. You can include more than what is needed if you'd like. That's perfectly okay, but just make sure you especially hit on those items such as educator quality, any needs that you have with educator quality in the Title II. There's also an allowable use of funds for Title II. All right, so looking at the application templates, you're going to continue, just like we have the last couple of years, to use your school's most updated version of the FY21 plan. Remember, that's that Excel file that I download for you from GEMS. So every time you submit an amendment, I download a new copy of your plan and I email it to you. So you're going to use the most recent version of that plan to use as a template for your FY22 plan. So basically, you're turning your FY21 plan into an FY22. So the reason for that is that when I start to complete the application or upload the application in GEMS, GEMS will roll over all of your FY21 activities into the new FY22 or 21 activities into the FY22 application, and I will have to go into GEMS and actually make those changes for you. Now, this can get a little tricky because some of you are waiting on amendments, those April 15th deadline amendments. Some of you are waiting on amendments to be approved. So if you're waiting on that, If you did not submit any April 15th amendments, then you can, and you don't have a copy of your plan, email me, I'll send it to you. If you submitted April amendments, wait for your new plan to be approved, and I always email that out to you anyway, so you're going to get a copy of it pretty soon. The following are directions for you to turn your FY21 plan into an FY22 plan. Just like last year, in the action column of your activity, I have a sample at the bottom. This is a screenshot of what your application might look like. So when you pull up that application, you have column B that is an action column. So you're going to type in either no change, update, delete, or new activity. This is going to help me know what I need to do to that activity in GEMS. Do not delete any activities. Don't physically really delete those activities. Type in the word delete, because if you actually highlight that column, or excuse me, highlight that row and delete it, I may not know to go into GEMS and delete it, and then your budget's going to be off, and it's going to cause a little extra work for me. So please type in the word delete. It always helps too if you highlight anything that you want me to delete in red, because that's a red flag to me to go in and delete. If you're not making any changes, which is usually very rare, then you can type in no change. But a new application, more than likely you may have changes to the cost, you may have changes to some of the details in the narrative. But if for some reason that activity is not changing at all, then you would just type in no change, and I know that I won't mess with that at all in GEMS. It will stay exactly the same. We talked about delete. If you are creating a new activity, just type in the word new. You don't have to worry about the budget detail because the system generates that number automatically for you. So that number will pop up after I have entered your new activity into GEMS. But the rest of this information you would have to complete. So make sure you are very detailed. Before I move forward, are there any questions about the application and how you're going to update this application? I don't see any in the chat box, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. If you are a new school and you've never completed an application like this before, we may have some of our new schools that are going to be joining us in the fall. These directions are a little different for you, so you wait until we get closer to the fall, and I'll take care of you in a separate training opportunity because you won't have an existing application yet. So don't worry, I'll help walk you through all of those. If you happen to be a new Title I school and you don't have an application, I will contact you and I will provide a different template for you. All right, any questions, comments about that? All right, good. Okay, so here are some other due dates that we have coming up in Epicenter. I haven't seen any notices to parents regarding teacher certification status in quite a while uploaded in Epicenter. So and this is true for all of our schools, if you have a teacher who is teaching and they're not properly certified for the assignment that they are currently in, you must send a notice to parents letting them know that the teacher is not certified for that position. So not to all parents, but to the parents of those children in those classes. So if you need any additional information about that, there is a sample copy on our website. If you have sent any of those letters this year, please make sure you upload those to Epicenter. I don't have a way of knowing who those people are unless you submit it, and we do have to provide those for the State Department when we are audited as samples. So be sure that you submit that, even if it's past those 10 days. If you sent it at the beginning of the year, please go ahead and submit it, but just be mindful that you should submit this at least 10 days after you send the letter to parents. You should submit it in Epicenter. All right, amendments. Schools that requested extensions. So April 28th is the absolute last deadline for any amendment. So I had a couple of schools that asked for extensions on amendments. As you know, they were due April 15th. So we had some schools that got them in last Friday. Tomorrow is the absolute last day. So if you still, I know I had a couple of schools I was working with individually who had to get some balances from finance and things like that. So April 28th is the absolute last deadline. We're not going to be able to give any more extension deadlines in order for us to process the amendments and then send them to the State Department for review, especially to meet that deadline, the financial deadlines that you're going to have to meet for reimbursement. So we want to make sure we get all of those in. So if anything is submitted after tomorrow, I will not be able to review it for you. So be sure to meet that tomorrow's deadline. Reimbursement requests. Remember that reimbursements are due the 20th of each month. The last opportunity to submit for reimbursement for this fiscal year is July 20th, 2021. So if you have any expenditures from federal plans, federal grants that you have spent between July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, please make sure you meet that July 20th deadline. Put a big red star on your calendar for July 20th. And that includes that CRF documentation, the Corona Relief Funds. Remember that the CRF funds were sent directly to the school. So you're not asking for reimbursement for those CRF funds because you already have the money, but you do have to submit the documentation in Epicenter, just like you normally would if you were asking for reimbursement. Again, complete that cover sheet, and we've talked about this before, but just reminding you, because I know there's so much going on, complete the cover sheet as if you were asking for reimbursement, and supply all of the documentation that's needed. We are a little bit behind. I admit there's been so much going on in federal programs lately. I'm a little behind in reviewing those, so I apologize for that. But I know that our finance department has to report on the spending of CRF funds. So please make sure you get all of that documentation in by July 20th. I also wanted to just say here, I know a lot of people like to take vacation during July, August. August 15th is the deadline that our finance office has to submit claims. There are no extensions. There are no extenuating circumstances that are allowed by the State Department. So we only have about, I guess that gives us about 3 weeks, a little bit less than a month, to review all of those submissions. I know a lot of schools wait to the last minute. Please, I'm encouraging you. I know I've said this a million times. Don't wait till the last minute. Please, submit monthly. It's already, what is it today? April 27th. So if you've got some, if you have funds out there that you're waiting or you're asking for reimbursement and you have not submitted yet, please, please, please meet that deadline. We have had some schools in the past that did not meet the deadline, or they perhaps had rejections and they did not resubmit their data in time and their reimbursement request in time, and therefore they were unable to ask for reimbursement, because once that fiscal year ends and we get to that August 15th deadline, we don't have any control over that. So I'm saying also make sure that you are mindful during the month of July, especially, of any rejections that you may receive through email, because you're going to have a very short window of time to resubmit. We may say, depending on whether it's closer to July 20th or the end of the month, there may be a 24-hour turnaround time or a 48-hour turnaround time. But the point is, please make sure that you're being mindful and you're watching your email and looking for rejections. I've also encouraged some of our schools to upload check their application, check Epicenter on a regular basis, maybe every day, just looking to see if anything had been rejected. All right, any questions about what we've talked about so far with reimbursements? I don't see anything in our chat box. Keep going. Here are just a couple of reminders. You saw this same slide last month, but I cannot remind you enough about financial deadlines, because we do not want you to leave any money on the table. So for all of those federal grants that are the FY19 and FY20, they expire September 30th of 2021. The ESSER grant, I've gotten a lot of questions about ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and when they expire. So you have until September 30th of 2022 to spend ESSER 1, but we are encouraging you to please spend down all those ESSER 1 funds. It's kind of one of those that rule of thumb, first in, first out. So you'll want to spend ESSER 1 before you move into ESSER 2. ESSER 2 has not been approved yet. I'll talk about that in just a minute, but so you can't submit for reimbursement yet, but just to keep in mind that ESSER 2 expires September 30th of 2023. The next amendment deadline is most likely going to be in September. That may change. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, we're looking at the possibility of moving to a two amendments a year, and we'll talk more about that when I get to a different slide. But I put this here just as a reminder that there are no more opportunities to amend FY19 or FY20, and the rationale behind that is that it's going to be very, very difficult for us to get amendments approved during the school year, during the summer months, between after this amendment is approved. It's very difficult to get amendments approved at the state level. So we'll talk a little more about that in a few moments, but just remember that the applications that are coming due soon, they will have opportunities for amendments later. All right, so the goal is to spend down FY19 and FY20 grants by the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th, to avoid leaving those funds on the table. However, you do have until September 30th, but be sure that all expenses up through June 30th are submitted for reimbursement by July 20th. I also wanted to just kind of throw something else in here. If you are submitting monthly, this will help you keep up with all of your reimbursements. And during the month of July, because we're going to have lots and lots of reimbursement requests coming through, if you're spending money in July, anytime after that June 30th deadline, wait until August 20th to submit anything that you expended after June 30th. That just helps to keep the confusion down and avoid confusion, because we're really going to need to focus on all of those in the fiscal year and get those out of our queue first. So then you can begin submitting for reimbursement for these grants. You have a couple of months to spend. All right, any questions about that? All right. So I told you we were going to talk about amendments, and this is where I'm going to ask for participation from all of you participating in our coffee chat today. We are thinking about the possibility of moving to allow only 2 amendment deadlines per year, maybe a mid-October and a mid-March. And the reason for that is that it's going to be much more efficient. This past year, we have allowed those emergency amendments due to COVID, but we're not going to be able to allow the types of emergency amendments that we've been receiving in the future. Now, I say that to say some of the emergency amendments that were submitted this year weren't really emergency amendments. They were more like okay, I didn't plan well, so now I've got to do this emergency amendment. And let me tell you the rationale behind that. It is very, very time consuming for everyone involved when we do amendments. There is a 3-step approval process at the school or the district level. So it comes to federal programs, then it goes to finance, and then it goes to our superintendent. So it has to be approved by those 3 different groups before it ever makes it to the State Department. Once it gets to the state level, then there is a 3-step process at the state level for approval as well. So you can understand why it may take a little more time to get these submitted and get them approved. It allows for more efficient planning based on the needs of the school. So I think because we've allowed some of these emergency amendments, and I know that it's been a very difficult year due to COVID, so I'm not saying anything about that, guys. I completely understand. But I think maybe we've gotten a little lax in our planning in some cases. And so it, this will help us to be more efficient in that planning process. And it also eliminates confusion for everyone involved. I've talked to lots of you during our monthly meetings, and you've expressed how confused you were based on all of these amendments and which application you're supposed to be looking at. And many of you have asked me multiple times this year for copies of your most recent plan, and I'm happy to always provide those things for you, but I think it's going to eliminate a lot of the confusion. It also eliminates confusion at the finance level and also at the State Department. You know, because we allowed so many amendments this year with those emergency amendments, we may have an amendment that we submitted in GEMS, because keep in mind that GEMS has to be approved at the state level. Once they notify us that it's been approved, then our finance department has to submit that amendment in GAPS, which is the system we use for claiming funds from the State Department. So sometimes there may have been a situation this year where we had entered a second amendment before the first amendment had been entered into GAPS. So by the time that first amendment in GAPS gets to the State Department says, hey, GAPS and GEMS don't match up. So by allowing you to submit all of those amendments, those emergency amendments, it created a little bit of confusion. We were able to work through it, but we want to eliminate any of that confusion and any issues with the State Department. So here's where I want feedback from you. What are your thoughts to us moving to the 2 amendment deadlines per year? So feel free to type into the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself and let's have a discussion about it. And it's okay to say whatever you like. I feel like this is a safe zone. We know each other all pretty well. I see someone with a hand raised. So let's see if you will unmute yourself and ask a question for us.
Hey,
Tracy. I don't know who it is.
It's Melissa with PACE.
Hey, Melissa.
I know I am super new at this, but going through the P&I grant and knowing how many amendments I've done on that, because I had no idea going in what we really would need the money for. Just listening to what you were saying, like, to me, that brings me anxiety that you go from pretty much free range of doing amendments as much as you want to only 2. So I would like to propose a suggestion that you also offer one like between that October and March, maybe December, January.
And that's what we did this year. This year we had 3 opportunities. We had a September 15th deadline, January 15th deadline, and then we had an April 15th deadline. Okay. So that's what we've done this past year. Okay,
never mind.
No, it's okay. I know you're very new to all of this, so any question is good. But that's kind of the things we need to hear. Like, what do you think is going to work best for you? You know, would 2 amendments stress you out to the point of, you know, just making it very, very difficult for you? Or do we think that moving to 2 amendments, maybe mid-October and mid-March, would allow for better planning? And you all have to let us know what you're thinking so that we can decide how to move forward.
I just think that mid-March is a long time away from mid-October.
And I did look at the date
here, how they feel about it, but that's a long time.
It gives you about 5 months in between each amendment. So you would definitely have to plan for, if an amendment was submitted in mid-October, more than likely it takes around a month or less to get it processed and approved. So that would throw you into November. So you would have to plan make sure that you have all your ducks in a row for the next 5 months until March. One of the issues that we had this year with doing the September, January, and April deadline is that the time period, by the time we got the amendments submitted, it was almost time to do another amendment. And you've got to keep in mind too that this was a very different year. This year we had FY19, FY20, FY21 grants open for Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. Then we had ESSER. The ESSER amendments are a nightmare. I'm just sharing and being completely transparent with you. I've said this before. They are a nightmare to process because you are basically starting that whole application process over again. They do not run through GEMS. And so finance, I think Nick will agree, it has been very, very time consuming for those ESSER amendments. Not quite as much for some of the title programs, but this coming year, we will end up having, 3 different ESSER grants. And hopefully we will only have 2 FY21 and FY22 grants together. Nick said ESSER is my favorite. I'm going to put a winky face there to say I disagree with you, Nick. I love the ESSER funds. I don't love the ESSER application. It's not my friend. So thank you for your feedback.
3 hands raised.
Okay, thank you.
Maureen Creasy's up first.
Hey, Maureen.
Hey, Tracy, my good friend. Okay, so if we're going to cut back to 2, I don't know about anybody else, but October has always seemed really soon in the school year to be jumping into an amendment.
Okay.
And we know a lot more rolling around by November and December. So and then you've got the holidays in there. So you're almost closed for 3 to 4 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and some people have fall breaks and whatnot. So what if we were, instead of having October, have a, early like December 1, and then push the other one out to April? I know that doesn't help you guys when it's that close to the end of the school year, but as far as discovery on our side of the street at the school level, that gives us a little bit more time to assess what's really working, what's happening, what isn't going to happen, what needs to change, and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. I've written those suggestions down, and I have to agree with you on the like a March amendment, because you have to think March. If we went to a March deadline, that would be your last opportunity to amend for any grants that expire in September. So whatever that last deadline date is, like right now it's April 15th, that's usually the last opportunity you'll have to amend your plans, because it would be almost impossible to get all the amendments submitted in the summertime and try to get them approved in time for you to implement the activities and then spend by September 30th when it expires. We didn't used to have these problems because they all expired on June 30th, but the last few years they've extended those expiration dates to September. So anyway, the summertime is when the State Department is busy trying to get all of the whole state's applications approved for the new year's, like Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, all of those. All right, did someone else have a hand raised? I think Courtney, you were echoing Maureen's comments that October seems too soon, and that's good information to have. What other thoughts do you have? Do we have Jackie? I think your hand is raised. Okay.
Yes, Tracy. April amendment is, as you said, is kind of tricky, only because by the time we get it approved, the school year is almost over. It really is. And so when you think about the activities that you try to amend for that April 15th, it almost has to be something that you can do the next month and then get reimbursed, because it's such a quick turnaround. And so that's just some thought as that April one, because right now we submitted the April one. We might not know if it's approved. It may be the middle of May before we know if it's approved.
That's true, but also keep in mind that because those FY19 and FY20 grants don't expire until September 30th, that you can amend the plan to spend past June 30th. You're encouraged to try to get as much of the plan spent as you possibly can. I always encourage schools to spend as much of the grant as they can in the first year to eliminate the confusion. As you've all seen this year, having 3 grant years open of the same grant, it can be very confusing. And then with Title I, you also have to spend 85% of your funding by June 30th in the first year. So during that first fiscal year, you have to spend 85% of your funding. So so yes, I can see where like in Title I, that would be a problem with you trying to get up to 85% spent. But then there are, that additional 15% you could spend, the remaining now, and that's for brand new grants. So you will have an additional year. So each grant is open for 2 years. So you would continue to have an additional year on the 15% of that Title I grant. Does that make sense? Let's see. Do we have some more questions in the chat? Oh, Sandy said, when should we get approval for Title I? Sandy, are you thinking about preliminary approval? So your FY, if we continued with that September deadline, then in September, you would be amending any grants that have been approved and are open. So that September deadline, let's say, for example, this coming September, that would include any FY21 grants and any FY22 grants that have already been approved. But my thoughts on that is that, well, number one, Title I you will not have final approval on Title I until most likely sometime in November or December, because of the final allocations coming out. So Title II, it's possible that we could have that approved before that deadline, but again, that's that's a couple of months turnaround. So I would think that that pre-planning is very, very important in making sure you know what you want to do for that first semester, especially of school. And Sandy said the actual approval of the plan. Yes, so for Title I, we receive a preliminary approval, but we can't begin asking for reimbursement on that because we actually have to start that process over again in the fall, because we have to use fifth day counts and so forth for new schools that may be coming on board. Okay, any more comments? You guys are giving me lots of good stuff to share with our team. So the first deadline would be mostly for IDEA, ESSER, CRF funds. Yeah, it would be any of those grants that haven't expired. They've already been approved, and don't expire at the end of September, because there's no way you could submit an amendment September 15th. It would not even probably get to the State Department before the deadline, the expiration deadline for any of those FY19 or FY21 grants. So any other comments so far? We have some folks that this might create a little anxiety because you're worried about planning. Some folks that said October may be too soon, suggested maybe an early December and April if we move to 2 amendments. Any other comments or suggestions? Okay, well, if you have any thoughts on that, you can shoot me an email. I'm thinking more than likely we're going to send out a survey so that we can get everyone's input before we decide to do anything. Okay, we just definitely want to have your input before we move forward with making any decisions on that. All right, let's move forward. Okay, just a reminder, during our last coffee chat, I shared with you that the U.S. Department of Ed was considering a waiver for the Title I 85% rule, that 15% carryover, and possible extensions for FY21 funds. Some of you just went, no, but we have not heard anything about any of those extensions. So at this point in time, we want to make sure that you spend as if these waivers will not occur. So continue as you have been doing. If you're a Title I school, make sure you spend at least 85% of your funding within the fiscal year, which was that July 1st through June 30th deadline. Also, just wanted to let you know, we did not have the 85% rule on our 3-tiered level of support rubric last year because of the waiver that was given. So this year we're adding that to our level of support. So if you do not spend 85% and you are a Title I school and you do not spend 85% of your Title I funds from this year, then that will cause you to drop down in tier support for that one indicator. So wanted to let you know about that. All right, moving on to a kind of a new topic. Let's talk Title I eligibility. So as you know, in the past, we have used free and reduced lunch, direct certification, to get percentages for poverty for each of our schools to determine eligibility. One of the issues that our schools have had with that is that it's not a very consistent or reliable means of gathering that poverty information. I know this year I've had lots of discussions with schools who were having parents not complete the forms because they choose not to. They don't want the school to have their information regarding salaries and income, other types of income. And yet some folks have felt that, you know, they might be closer to being eligible if more parents would complete the forms. So we all know that's an issue. So the State Department has announced that they are moving toward a more consistent and more reliable method of determining Title I eligibility. And that is by using the PIP percentages. PIP stands for Pupils in Poverty. And the PIP percentages include data from Medicaid, SNAP, TANF, homeless, foster care, and all of those different sources of poverty to give a more accurate representation of what the poverty percentage is. We have not been able to use that in the past because we did not have all of the data for our new schools that would be coming on board. But this is something that the State Department is going to be moving toward in the near future. I had a meeting with the State Department last week in regards to how this impacts charter schools, because obviously we're a little different. For our traditional, the traditional public districts, they use that 135-day count. They submit it with their preliminary. When final allocations come out, it's usually as simple as you know, adding the little bit of money or taking the little bit of money away from district set-asides, and schools honestly don't have to be bothered with recreating a whole new application based on eligibility and also based on those free and reduced lunch counts from 5th day. You know, even this year we had a school that qualified, I think it was 2 schools, may have been 1 school, can't remember now, but they qualified during preliminary as a Title I school. They created a preliminary Title I application, but then when we had to reassess eligibility in the fall using 5th day data, they no longer qualified. So, and vice versa, we could have the opposite situation. We may have schools that qualify that fit based on 5th day data that didn't on 135-day data. So again, the South Carolina Department of Education is not sure when they're going to enforce this mandate or when it becomes mandatory, but they're encouraging all schools to begin this process or this transition as soon as possible. So again, the issue that it creates for charter schools is that 5th day data. So I met with the State Department again last week. We talked about the challenges, the timeline, and so forth. And so I'm waiting to hear back from the State Department regarding when the PIP data would be available for our new schools. They suggested that it may be that we use 45th day counts for PIP data, and then of course continue with 5th day counts for enrollment. But we have to wait and see what the State Department is thinking in terms of that timeline. So what does this mean for us right now? Right now I'm in the process, or we as a team are in the process of researching PIP data, of course continuing to collaborate with the South Carolina Department of Education to determine next steps. All of this may cause a delay in the timeline for your preliminary eligibility and the notification of your allocations. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like for us, next steps at the district level, we did receive those preliminary allocations yesterday. I have already sent out information to our district folks who are involved in the internal process. We are going to look at the PIP data. We're also going to look at the 135th day data for free and reduced lunch. We're going to compare the two to see how it impacts us. More than likely, just based on the preliminary data that I have reviewed so far, we would end up having more schools to qualify, meaning they're 40% or above, than we have in the past. Now, the requirement of the state, or requirement of federal program actually, is that if a school is at 75% poverty, then the district must serve those schools as Title I schools. If they are 40%, within that 40% up to that 75%, or below that 75%, then it is an option for schools to be, for a district to serve those schools as Title I schools. And the things that we have to consider there are, would the funding amount be enough to allow the school to create a quality school-wide program? So those of you who have been Title I schools before or are Title I schools now, I know that you understand that it's not just about a pocket of money or a bucket of money. It's a lot more than that. It's creating a whole school-wide program and determining what your needs are and using using the funds to meet those needs. But again, there may not be enough to spread out amongst all of those schools to be able to create that type of quality program. So it could impact how we think about funding schools that are eligible. 75% schools, there's no question you would be funded. And the others, that's going to be a good conversation. Lots of meetings about that. So what are the next steps for you as a school? So, we talked a lot about the needs assessment last week, or last month. We talked about how the needs assessment is the first step in, determining any type of activities for funding. So I want you to just continue with your needs assessment. And when you're looking at your needs assessment, look at it in terms of your whole school. We talk about academic data, we talk about educator quality. A lot of that falls under Title II, but some of it can fall under Title I. Don't think about it in terms of this is for Title I, this is for Title II, this is for Title IV. Don't think of it like that. Think of it as this is a whole picture of what our needs are for our school. Here's our data. We've analyzed our data, and this is what we have found out to be our needs. Then prioritize those needs and think about ways in which you can meet those needs. Those are your activities. So again, take out the whole, this is Title I, this is Title II, and so forth, and think about it in terms of just prioritizing those needs and how you can possibly meet those needs using any funding. Whether you're Title I school or you get Title II funding or Title IV funding, these are needs that your school has regardless, and this is a best practice for you, regardless of what type of federal, which is additional funding that you receive. I also want to just point out that federal funds are all of those funds that are in addition to. So your federal funds don't replace any of the funds that you currently receive. That would be supplanting. So these are additional needs to help you upgrade those programs in your school. So keep thinking of it like that will help you in terms of just knowing what your needs are and how you're going to meet those needs. And once you have all of those needs met with a kind of a utopia of, if I had the funding, the additional funding to do this, what would we do? How would we meet these needs? Then you can determine funding sources. Then you can look at it and say, okay, perhaps math is a big need for your third graders. How are we going to meet the needs to help increase student achievement in math for our third graders? Then you look at your funding sources. Okay, well, we have some funds in Title I. We have some funds in Title II. We have some, how can we use this? What is the need? Is this a are these programs that the students need? Are these, is there professional development that's needed for the teachers? Making sure you know what those needs are first. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that you're understanding that for some schools that may be a very different way of thinking about it. It may be a shift in your thinking. But I think it's probably one of the best ways for you to approach this, especially since we don't know. We don't know what next year is going to look like. And this is true even if we didn't have a new methodology. We don't know if you're going to qualify from year to year for any federal funds. We have to wait and see how all of the data shakes out, what the numbers look like, what the allocations are. There's no guarantee that we're going to receive allocations, or there could be a decline in allocations each year. We just don't know that information, so it's always something that's a year-to-year situation. So any thoughts on that? Courtney said, Tracy, could you please elaborate more on the PIP data? How does the district receive it? Is it available to the schools, integrated into PS, which would be PowerSchool, Enrich, etc.? Courtney, those are really great questions, and those are questions that we're trying to get the answers to right now, that collaboration with the State Department. My understanding right now is that the State Department sends that data to the districts, and that I think, Nick, do you have some additional information on how that PIP data is given to the districts? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
PIP data is derived from 3 sources. The first source is PowerSchool. The second is the school nutrition system. And then the third is the socioeconomic indicator, which comes from Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office.
Okay, thank you, Nick. So that information is usually sent to the schools, to the district. I don't know if it's sent to the schools or not. Do you know, Nick, whether the State Department sends that down to individual schools, or if that is something that the district sends to schools? I don't know what that process looks like yet.
Yeah, that's a process where, like, the RFA file has to be uploaded into PowerSchool, and that's sent out monthly from the State Department. But all of that data is collected through PowerSchool, and it's reported with your membership. So when you upload your 5-day, 45-day, and 135-day membership reports to the SCDE, that's how it's all derived.
Thank you, Nick. So what I'm hearing is that PowerSchool is still very, very important in making sure that your information and your data is entered correctly for your students. That's where they're going to gather that information for homeless students, foster care. And let's see, I think Courtney's typing, so I'll wait for that question. Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Tracy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I figured it might be easier just to speak rather than try to type all that. So
Okay.
What I'm more concerned is, as you mentioned, this data is very hard for the schools to gather. Parents don't fill out the information. I do feel like we're missing a lot of students that are not listed in our PowerSchool, and it's not because we haven't entered the data accurately, it's because we don't have it to be able to enter. So I am curious, and this may not be a question you guys can answer right now, but I do believe there are plenty of parents or students who would be eligible because they do receive Medicaid, they do have SNAP, all of those things that you've listed there. We're just not privy to that data. Does that make sense? And so that was more of my question, is how do we get that information so that we can make sure our PowerSchool is accurate? And just as a point of note, we don't participate in the lunch program. So I think we kind of get left out of a lot of information because we don't have a lunch program.
Okay, Courtney, those are great questions. I think Nick has unmuted. So Nick, did you want to answer that question?
Yeah, the majority of those students that you're referencing are going to be on that RFA file that we receive from the State Department of Education monthly.
And how does that get shared with the schools?
I think that's a process where our new vendor, Canty, uploads that file into PowerSchool.
Okay, so Courtney, those are all good questions, and I appreciate you asking them. I'm making note of them so that we will know what questions to ask, because this is a new process for all of us. So I appreciate any input that you all have or any questions that you have, because again, it's new to us as well. And I'm not 100% sure we're going to be using it this year. We don't have to use it this year. We may proceed as we have in the past, but we want to go ahead and start the process and start the transition so that we know what to ask, and we know the answers to some of these questions that you're asking. So these are all good questions. Any other questions? I think Michelle said, I guess we would have to be trained to see where it is. If the schools have access to that information, yes. So we would definitely provide additional information to you and training you know, on the pieces that we know. I can tell you this, when the allocations were sent to the State Department, or excuse me, when the allocations were sent from the State Department to us, they sent Title I preliminary, Title II preliminary, and they also sent the PIP file. So they sent a PIP file so that we can see each one of our schools and we can see how many students fall under poverty and how many don't, based on all of those indicators. So that's what I'm using right now to determine what your PIP data is. So for me, you know, that I'm understanding from the State Department that information is going to come from the State Department. And when they send out allocations, they will continue to send out the PIP data that they have currently. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, as always, we will continue to keep you updated and let you know where we are with this process. I hope to have more information for you during our next month's coffee chat. But again, for you, just continue to proceed as you've been doing, because the needs assessment, this doesn't change your needs assessment. This doesn't change how you prioritize your needs and create activities to meet those needs. So, you know, just continue to work on those things, and I will continue to update you on any date changes or timelines for you to get those processed. Okay. All right, let's see what else we have. I think I have already shared this, but I'll let you know. ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, I've been getting lots of questions about those. So ESSER 2 status, we are still awaiting approval from the South Carolina Department of Education. I have been in communication with them a couple of times this week and last week. They have additional questions about some of those category 13 and 14, which involves construction. The person that I've been communicating with at the State Department is still waiting for information. So we'll have an update for you hopefully soon. I think based on the information I heard from him today, it may require us to do a little more with the application there. As I think I mentioned to you in the past, that the application for ESSER is not charter school friendly. You know, most of the other districts in public school districts are able to summarize and submit based on what the district wants them to do. We don't do that. We allocate all the funding to you all, and you all create your applications and decide how you want to use the funding. So the application does not allow us to put in all of those details that you normally submit. So we attach that as an attachment, but they're not even looking at it. So we may have to find another way to enter all of that data. So it's like I said, ESSER is not my friend, not when it comes to the application part. So we're working on that. I'm working overtime to figure out what we need to do to get that approved for you as quickly as possible. I will tell you, I know I can't remember how many of our schools, I'd have to go back and pull it up, but I did hear today that they are not approving any construction changes that may have to do with things like athletics. I think we had a school that wanted to provide additional extracurricular activities, and they wanted to create a turf, like a soccer turf. And he said that, you know, they're not allowing anything that means updating athletics. And they were looking at that as that type of activity. So if that was your school, I'll be in touch with you. I haven't had a chance to contact you yet, so I'll be in touch. ESSER 3, we have no updates. We're still awaiting allocations from the State Department, which this is just me sharing my opinion or what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to wait until all of ESSER 2 applications have been approved for the state and maybe start the new fiscal year with those ESSER 3 allocations. That's what I'm thinking is going to happen. All right, before I move into Title I impact statements, are there any other questions for me regarding anything that I've talked about today? All right. Well, if you are not currently a Title I school, you are welcome to hop off the call because what I'm about to talk about is really it only impacts our Title I schools this year anyway. Some of you might be Title I schools next year, you never know. So feel free to stay on the line. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Title I impact statements. All of our Title I schools submitted mid-year evaluations, which were those mid-year impact statements. You have an end-of-year impact statement that's going to be coming up pretty soon. So I wanted to go ahead and provide you with that template. Let me scroll down so that you can see. There it is. I want to show you what it looks like. It looks very much like the mid-year evaluation. The difference is that your end-of-year evaluation has another section. It has basically a part 2. So you're still going to use your include all of the activities that you have done this year in Title I, even if it ended up being in a different year, grant year. You can indicate what, if it was FY19 plan, FY20 plan, FY21 plan, whatever the case may be. But whatever activities from Title I that you implemented this year, meaning you did spend money on this year, those are the activities you need to copy from the approved plan to include in the first section. And then you're going to want to tell me what the budget was. Your end of year evaluation is going to also tell the percentage of funds that you spent for the whole year in that activity. And then you're also going to continue to answer the question as to whether or not you expended those funds this year at the rate you intended. What tool did you use? Most of this information you already have. You may have to update it. Or excuse me, you already have from your mid-year evaluation, but you're going to update it based on what your end-of-year evaluation looks like. The results of that activity, we've talked about this already, all those questions to consider. Is there evidence to support that the activity had an impact on student achievement? Tell us what those examples were, explain the type of impact the activity had. And if it did not have an impact, then what type of evidence was needed to determine the impact? Maybe the evidence or the tool that you used did not give you the information that you needed to make a determination. What could you have done differently? How could you have assessed that activity differently? And then of course, column G is your end year evaluation next steps based on results. So questions to consider: was there sufficient evidence to support the continuation of this activity? What are your next steps based on, that still says mid-year evaluation. I realize that I forgot to change it to end year, but what are your next steps based on that end of year evaluation? Are you going to, is there a need to continue to include this activity in your plan for next year? Or are you ready to move on to step 2 of this particular activity? Or did you decide, this is not working, that, we're not going to do this, we're going to implement something else. Maybe it had the desired results that you wanted, and therefore you, you want to continue to do the activity. Whatever that outcome is. The difference between your end of year evaluation is that, and your mid-year, is that the end of year has a summary with it. So using the information that you've gathered at the top of this, you're going to provide a written summary of how the Title I activities were used to impact student achievement during the 2021 school year. Be sure to discuss the evaluation tool that was used, the results of each evaluation, and how those results were used to determine next steps. So keep in mind that folks are not going to, let's pretend that folks are not seeing the step 1. Pretend that they're not seeing each of these columns at the top, because the way in which we're going to report this is based on your summary. So pretend that the folks who are reading it have no clue as to what your activities were. They don't know what tools you use to measure student impact. And think about your audience as all stakeholders. So that would include any board members, parents, teachers, students, business community, anyone who might read something like this. What I'm hoping to do is to be able to put together a summary of all of your summaries into a report that we can share with others. So I want you to keep that in mind as you are creating a narrative for your summary. They're not going to see the mid-year evaluation. They're not going to see the information that you've provided in that first step. They're only going to see the summary of results. So you want to let them know what impact each of these activities had, what a difference it made. And also you can include, if something didn't work, it didn't work. The data is going to be very telling and let you know, did it have an impact? Did it not? Because this is a really good way for you to evaluate whether or not those activities had an impact, and it helps you to determine how you're going to move forward and what those next steps are. So what questions do you have for me about your Title I impact statements? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see any hands raised. So it sounds like you guys are good to go with that. If you have any questions, please just send me an email or let me know. All right, so any other questions? Somebody said, Jenny, when is this due again? Let me go back up to our dates to make sure I give you the correct date for Title I. Okay, so July 1st. Not due until July 1st. That gives you a chance to get through most of your expenditures, and you should have everything submitted by, as far as reimbursement goes and funding, you should have all of that submitted by June 30th. So that should, if you need to go back and add anything on that last date, that gives you only one day to do it. But it does give you an opportunity to spend all of your funding first, or the majority of your funding. Any other questions? All right, I will be sending out this PowerPoint along with the recording. But before we go, I did want to remind you, especially our Title I schools, that there is an opportunity, many opportunities for you that will especially help with your requirement for parent and family engagement. Wendy Ward, as you know, is our social emotional learning coach here in the district, and she has been offering family SEL nights. Those have been very impactful. So if you are interested in the next session, this is our 7th session. It's entitled Helping Your Child Handle Grief. It's on May 12th at 7 p.m. You can sign up, and you will get a link to the meeting, and you can share that with all of your families. This is a great opportunity for you to provide some opportunities for parents to be involved and to help some of your parents. And again, that's that falls right in line with your Title I requirements with involving parents and offering opportunities for parents to be involved. All right, any other questions or comments before we hop off? I also wanted to remind you, and I'll have to provide the link for you. I forgot to put it in this particular PowerPoint today, but we always like your input. So if you will, please, I'll send the link in an email with the PowerPoint and the recording. So if you will, please click on that evaluation link and let me know what needs you have. How'd the chat go today? I very much value your input. These resources will also be available for you to click on. And there's my contact information. Oh, I did provide a survey link. I forgot. All right, it's on that last page. So, and I will also copy that real quick. And let me stop sharing, and I will copy that link for you and put it in the chat box so that you can go ahead and hop on and provide information. All right, any other questions or comments or celebrations? All right, well, I appreciate everything you guys are doing. And if you have any questions, please, as always, let me know. Have a great afternoon.